Perek Halacha Zion, Chapter 5, Halacha 16. Siger Vidova Posel, Vidova Kosher. If you made schach out of something which is kosher, goes to the ground, Vidova Posel, like metal, Vidova Kosher, that goes from the ground. We'll see in the Peirush. Zeh b'tzad zeh, one next to the other. Ve'im mokim echad b'schach posel roichav shlosha tvachim. There's no place where the schach posel is 3 tvachim wide. Alapochos, it's always less. If the entirety of all the area covered by the schach kosher is yesar kol schach posel, is more than the schach that's posel, it's kosher. But if it's 3 tvachim in a sukkah ktana, it's posel, like in halacha yud. If they were equal exactly, but simtzum exactly, even if there is no area that has 3 tvachim of metal, it has all of schach. It is possible schach posel keporot zu nechshav, because schach posel is considered, it is like ear, and therefore it's not considered that it has schach, because the majority is not schach kosher. The Maggid Mishnah cites the source as the Mishnah in Sukkah 15a. That's a ceiling, meaning you can cover your sukkah with metal bars that receive tumah, or by parts of the bed that there is also posel wooden parts, because it's a vessel. If there is as much space between them as they are, and he puts them schach kosher in that space, it's kosher. The Gemara questions, that's not like Avuna B'rei Rabbi Yeshua, that who says that if it's equivalent, it's posel. The Gemara answers that the Mishnah is talking about that the space between each metal area is greater than the area of the metal area, in order that you can put into it the schach and it should fit in. Thus, the schach is more than the schach posel. The Rambam codifies the halacha like this answer, going to Avuna B'rei Rabbi Yeshua. Therefore, he says if all the schach that was kosher was more than the schach posel, it's kosher. And if it was equivalent, it's posel. When it says the area that's porous, that's not covered by schach, is like equivalent exactly, it's posel. Maggid Mishnah questions that in Erevin we pass in a rapopo that if the area that's open, meaning not kosher schach, is the same as the other, it's mutter. The Rambam so codifies the halacha in Hilchos Shabbos. He should have said that here too by schach, by sukkah, if they're equal, it's a good sukkah. And he says that the reason that the Rif and all the other commentaries are of the opinion that it is not like Avuna B'rei Rabbi Yeshua, that sukkah, that the schach kosher is like the posel is kosher, because whatever is standing is open is the same as that which is standing, like Rapopo. Halacha Yud Beis, that's what the Ramban says as well. As the Mishnah answers, and the Rambam had a text like Rabbeinu Tam in Erevin Tesvov 15b. It's impossible to make it exact. I've said that there's a little bit extra. Even if there's not a little bit extra of the schach kosher, if you had them, the kosher schach going one way, and the non-kosher schach going the other way, across and sideways, therefore you leave the schach kosher to the width, and you put it to the breadth. And the question is, you can't make it exact. How can a person know for sure it's exactly equal? Even according to Papa, who says that if the majority is like the standing, it's mutter. It can't be. And the Gemara answers b'madif, that you add a little bit more, even according to Papa. Therefore, the Rambam here says that you have to have more than the posel that's going even according to Papa. He's not disagreeing with the other Rishonim. But he questions why the Rambam didn't write that you have to do it not in the same direction, but one has to be going crosswise and one has to be going straightwise, as the words of Rava, that he's from the last of the Amorim. The Halacha is always like the later Amorim. And he answers that this is included in what he wrote. If the schach kosher was more than schach posel, it's kosher. If the schach posel is placed as a sideways, the other, or vice versa, he has more. Like in Rashi says that on the Mishnah, if you place metal rods on the schach, it must be that the schach kosher is more than the posel. It nullifies it, and only then is it kosher. So Rambam, he asks further. Rambam writes, if it's equivalent, it's considered that it is as much posel as oimid. It has to be, should be kosher. Why does he say it's not kosher? And he answers that you can't really be exact, and therefore he has to fill it with a little bit more schach kosher. Otherwise, there's ear, and the ear would become part of the non-kosher schach, and therefore, since he adds a little bit more, that's why it's kosher. The Maggid Mishnah questions this because the Rambam says that the Mishnah is talking about that the space is greater for the schach kosher than the other space. Therefore, it's kosher because it's greater, and that's only according to Avuna B'rei Rav Yeshua. The Halacha does not accord with him. He also asks why the Rambam has to say it should be more. In all the Shabbos, he says it could be equivalent. The Maggid Mishnah first mentions to explain that the Rambam is correct, that when you have schach posel, it's considered like there's an opening, because the Gemara questions from if somebody covers his sukkah with metal, it's called schach posel. And that's the question of Huna B'rei Rav Yeshua, who says if they're equivalent, this area, it's posel. Must be that according to the Gemara, its posel is considered like porous, like it's open, like ear. And he explains the words of the Rambam. The schach posel would be like the schach kosher, exactly the sukkah's posel, since underneath in the ground, the sun will be greater than the shade, because light spreads. That the shade is area, the shady area is considered open, like ear, and therefore it's possible, because if you have half covered, the sukkah will have too much sun, and everybody can see that every light that goes in through a small hole creates a large area of light. Therefore, when it's equivalent, you're going to have to say that the sun, if it would be able to go through the metal, would be greater than the shade. Always the sun is more. Therefore, he brings a proof that it's possible from Rav Amir Rabbo, that he said the kosher is more than the posel. Therefore, the Rambam had to say only if the area between them, the spaces, is more than the posel, it's kosher. My Mishnah questions why the Gemara didn't ask from the area of the Mishnah that says if you cover the sukkah with metal, according to Rav Papa, even though he is of the opinion that if the equivalent is kosher, when above it's equivalent, but the bottom will be the sun more than the shade. The Maggid Mishnah answered the Gemara could have asked, according to Rav Papa, the same question, but it didn't say it. Kaz the Mishnah still questions Halacha Yutes, that by schach that has holes, if there's ear between them, like the area that it's covered, is posel. Why? Because underneath, as we said, the sun will always have greater space than the shade. Thus, according to the Rambam, if it's equivalent, it would be posel. And there's no difference between schach posel, according to him, to ear, who makes that difference in Perek HaYoshen and Halacha Yutes. Here he writes specifically that schach posel is considered like ear, like if there would be nothing there. The Kesef Mishnah says that the intention of the Rambam is that the schach that's posel is like ear, that the area of the schach posel is combined with the ear, not that it itself is ear. And therefore, it's impossible to be exact when you put something next to each other, because even if you put two rods next to each other, there'll be some air space between them. And therefore, in the kosher, there's a little bit of ear. The ear that's there will be added to the schach posel, and therefore the majority will be schach posel. And therefore, he has to add more schach so that it will be greater than the area that's posel. So when it says more, he means the area of the schach of the rods, and the area of the airspace between the schach itself that's kosher. Now, regarding a schach that has holes in it, we're talking that the schach is exactly like the area of the holes in its posel, as we mentioned above, because the sun will be greater. Because you can't make it exact, and even if it looks that way, the Poretz is always greater until the schach kosher will be more than the ear. Then we talk about shade. The Poretz ka'omer would be kosher. Therefore, according to the Magen Mishnah, even if you would somehow be able to measure exactly, even though in a ceiling the opening is exactly 7 by 7, or the schach posel is the same as the area of the kosher, because since underneath the sun will be greater, that the sun goes in through the holes and spreads out, the light spreads out, and even though in the roof, the area which is open is the same as the area that's closed, even so, going to the Mishnah, because the Mishnah is posel, because there's air between the schach kosher as well, and that comes to join the other part, and therefore would be posel. The Rae Gann disagrees. This I don't comprehend why he said it. Ulai maybe besukah gedola he said it by a large sukkah. When mikare sukkos b'shvudim v'dova kosher, and he covered the sukkah with metal and schach, that's kosher. Because you cannot make it exact. But the reason that he stated, the Rambam stated, doesn't seem to go according to this concept. Hilchos Mishnah cites the Ravid in his Sefer Tumas Yishorim. The Balamoyer explains the intent of the Ravid, that above what you have has to be more than that which is below. So that below, the sun will not give you more sun and shade. And since the Rambam says, and since the Rambam says, if the schach above was more than the schach posel, it's kosher, would seem even it's only slightly more, even though the below, that slight won't overcome the difference between sun and shade. Therefore, the Ravid disagrees. Why should a little bit be enough? And he continues that according to the logic of that the Kesef Mishnah mentioned around, even according to the Rambam, it's not enough just to have a little bit. If below the sun is more, the sukkah would be posel. But if we're talking about schach posel, even if the kosher is only a little bit more, it's kosher, even though below the sun is more. And the Kesef Mishnah adds that this can be disqualified. The teretz of the Magen Mishnah in the Shitas of Rambam. And this differentiation between that the logic of the Ran, that you only worry about the sun below if above it's equal, but if above it's small, you don't worry about the sun below, that can be pushed off in the idea of understanding the Rambam. The Ravid, even though he admits that when there is ear, you have to have below the sun less than the shade, but if he minimized the area of the ear with schach posel, it would be considered that the schach that is not kosher is more than the kosher l'rapopo. The halacha is like according to him, because because of the ear that is in the schach posel, not the ear that's in the schach kosher. So the difference is when we measure whether the schach kosher has the ear or the schach kosher doesn't is only when they're equivalent. But if the schach kosher is more, then you would count only the ear that's in the schach posel to make the schach posel more than the schach kosher. And Rae is of the opinion that if they're equivalent, it's okay, only if Eliyahu will tell us it's exact. Otherwise, we have to assume you can't be exact, and therefore the try is schach posel with the ear spaces is more. That's why the Gemara says you cannot be exact, that it's kosher, and therefore it's posel. The Ravid says the halacha that they are equivalent is only if we have the opinion you can be exact. The halacha is that you can't be exact, and only regarding a mechitza on Shabbos we're saying that if the opening that was broken open in the around the Rishos HaYochid is equivalent to that which is standing, it's okay, because even if it fell down more, it's only a mechitza because of the Rabbanon, and therefore when they're equivalent, even if it's not possible to be mitzamtzim, in other words, the Chachamim say that the majority is down, it's not called a mechitza, that's only the Rabbanon. In the Torah it is a mechitza. Therefore, if they're equivalent or seem to be equivalent, even if we say you can't be exact, in the Rabbanons we are lenient. The Mekevaz Mishnah explains that this is the intent of the Ravid when he says, because you cannot make it exact. That even though the din, the Rambam is correct, but the reason is because you cannot make it exact as possible. If Eliyahu will come and tell us it's exact, it's kosher. And the words of the Ravid, but the reason that he wrote is not on this heading. That means what the Rambam explains, because the schach posel is like an opening ear, it's considered. That's not the reason. The reason is because you can't make it exact. Well, you will come, then it would be kosher. Here is our Mishnah questions. What's the intent of the Ravid? What he says that it begins Leirati Lama Omri. What does he mean? Because the halacha is like a papa, that if they're equivalent, it's mutter. He says it's not correct because Parotzayim is mutter. Furthermore, he says maybe he's talking about a big sukkah. If that's his reason, what's he answering? But sukkah, and if the Ravid's intent is to disagree, and when he says if there's no place in the schach posel 3 tvochim, and he argues that we're talking about a sukkah, a small sukkah, right? We even 3 tvochim pastels, whether it's from the side or from the middle. What does he continue? Maybe he's talking about sukkah gdoila. There you don't talk about 3 tvochim. 4. Therefore, the Mekevaz Mishnah explains that Omroi means it should be b'cholam. Haresh. Omroi, hey, and not b'melupis. Omru. And he means to say, Omroi. Why do I want to say this at all? Ve'ilu b'sukkah gdoila Omru. Here it means it was said, what the Ravid said above. The question was, there's no schach posel 3 tvochim. Also he said, schach posel is considered like poritz, because Omru, both things. Because Allah is like a papa, the poritz ka'omer is permitted. And he says, Lo yadati, I don't know what his intent is. He explains that his intent is maybe regarding what the Rambam says, it's talking about sukkah ktana. It's schach posel b'gimel tvochim, and therefore it's called poritz meruba. Gimel tvochim it's posel. Sukkah gdoila, where there's no din that the schach posel is like the avir, it should be kosher when it's equivalent. And that's why Rav says, I don't know why he said it with a omroi, why did he say it with a cholim? Why did he say that there's no elsewhere 3 tvochim? Because you can't say it's referring to a small sukkah. And if it's so, you shouldn't have a question on the Mishnah, Halacha, Ports, Screaming Mutter. That isn't the question either. But maybe he said that even regarding a Sukkah Gedolah. And what he says that Ports is the same, it's also, is because you cannot be exact. And he concludes, maybe Sukkah Gedolah what was said, B'melupis. The Chazal said that even in the Gedolah it's forbidden because it's Yeshua Tzamsim. But according to this, he disagrees with the Rambam. But the Merkavas HaMishnah himself answers the Rambam. That's talking about the Mishnah is talking about even by a large sukkah, like the Rae, that you can't make it exact. And what it says, "Ve'ein b'schach posel gimel tvachim," isn't by sukkah ktana. He's telling you a flat that there's no place that there's gimel tvachim of schach posel. There's a majority of schach kosher. It's kosher even by sukkah ktana. And for in actuality, if it would be the same, it would always be posel because you cannot be exact. And at the end of Merkavas HaMishnah says, we understand the words of the Ravad, that the Rambam wrote that the reason that schach posel is like ear, it doesn't have anything to do with it. It depends whether you say you can be exact or not. Sholoch says the halacha is that if you covered it with metal, that a posel is schach, it's schach posel, and they have there's no space of four by in one place. He didn't put them next to each other. There'll be four sorchim schach posel together, and he left between each metal space as much as the metal and the width of the metal, and he put the schach kosher. It's posel because you cannot make it exact. That the ears should be because the ear between the schach also minimize the measure of the schach, and therefore, if he tries to do it exact, one piece of schach, one piece of metal, he will have more posel because of the ear than schach. Like the Ravad said, like the Gemara had questions, and as the Kesef Mishnah explained, that's even according to our Papa. But if he added a little bit of schach, it's kosher, even a little bit. Or if the psul was placed, the rods were placed lengthwise and the other one was placed widthwise, or vice versa, it's kosher because then all the air spaces are filled. There are more ads, but only by a sukkah gedolah. By a sukkah ktana, it has to be that the space that the shvud and the metal takes up is less than gimel tvachim in one area.